Good evening, friends. I'm Richard Wolff, and today I'd like to share a careful, critical look at the crisis unfolding in Ukraine, a conflict that is no longer just a regional struggle, but a flashpoint for something far larger. The question we must confront urgently and honestly is this: could U.S. involvement push this war into a wider, perhaps even global confrontation? To understand what is happening today, we have to step back. This conflict did not begin in a vacuum. For decades, the United States and its allies in NATO have expanded eastward, even as Russia repeatedly warned that such moves threatened its security. Ukraine has become the stage on which two great powers wrestle, not simply over borders, but over influence, resources, and economic models. What we are witnessing is not only a military confrontation, but also an economic one. Sanctions, energy disputes, and financial warfare are all part of the same battlefield. Ordinary people, from Kiev to Moscow, from Berlin to New York, are paying the price in higher energy bills, food insecurity, and growing political instability. Ask yourself, who benefits from a prolonged war? The arms industry, the fossil fuel giants, the financial speculators. These are the groups cashing in while civilians bleed. Consider this: every new shipment of weapons, every escalation in rhetoric narrows the space for diplomacy. And remember, empires throughout history, from Rome to Britain, have stumbled into wars they believed they could control, only to find themselves in a catastrophe. The United States frames its role as defending democracy, but beneath the slogans are material interests. U.S. energy producers are enjoying record profits, selling liquefied natural gas to Europe, replacing cheaper Russian supplies. American defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others are seeing their stock prices soar as orders for weapons surge. This is not to deny that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of international law, but to stop at condemnation misses the deeper reality. The geopolitical chessboard is shaped by economic motives. The U.S. political class, Republicans and Democrats alike, has long relied on foreign conflicts to justify massive military budgets and to distract from deep domestic problems: inequality, crumbling infrastructure, and stagnant wages. Here lies the danger. Each step of U.S. escalation, more advanced weapons, intelligence support, covert operations, invites countermeasures from Russia. Moscow has already signaled that certain red lines, if crossed, would provoke a far broader response. In a world where nuclear arsenals exist on both sides, miscalculation is not merely possible, it is terrifyingly plausible. Europe, too, is at risk. NATO's unity is being tested by economic strain and public discontent. A single incident, a downed aircraft, a cyber attack, a misinterpreted military exercise could transform this proxy war into a direct clash between nuclear powers. It does not have to be this way. History offers examples of diplomacy, even between bitter rivals, that diffused crisis: the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the DA-10 of the 1970s. These lessons show that negotiation is not weakness, it is survival. The U.S. could lead a coalition for peace talks, for a security framework that respects both Ukrainian sovereignty and Russian security concerns. Instead, we see a bipartisan consensus for more weapons, more sanctions, more brinkmanship. The rising tension between Washington and Moscow over Ukraine has reached a level that many analysts compare to the most perilous moments of the Cold War. Each week brings a new round of military assistance from the United States: advanced artillery, long-range missile systems, real-time intelligence sharing. On the surface, these moves are presented as necessary steps to defend Ukrainian sovereignty, but beneath the official narrative lies a far more complex and unsettling reality. Every new shipment of weapons is not just a lifeline for Kiev. It is also a calculated signal to Moscow that the United States is willing to push the boundaries of confrontation. That signal, repeated and amplified, is exactly what drives this crisis toward a dangerous edge. Ask yourself, how many times in history have great powers misread one another's intentions and stumbled into a conflict neither side truly wanted? From the guns of August in 1914 to the hair trigger brinkmanship of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the lesson is always the same. Escalation is rarely controlled, and the margin for error is razor thin. Today, the United States and Russia possess nuclear arsenals capable of ending civilization. The idea that we can continue to raise the stakes without consequence is not merely optimistic, it is reckless. Behind the public debate about supporting democracy lies an intricate web of strategic calculations. For U.S. policymakers, maintaining credibility with NATO allies and deterring future aggression by other rivals, most notably China, has become a central justification for continued escalation. Yet the very pursuit of credibility often creates the opposite result. The more Washington doubles down on military support, the more Moscow feels compelled to demonstrate it will not be intimidated. Each side interprets the other's caution as weakness and every act of restraint as a challenge to be met. Consider the hooks that should catch our attention. A single misinterpreted radar signal could be read as a preemptive strike. A lone cyber attack on critical infrastructure might be mistaken for state-sponsored sabotage. A military exercise near a contested border could spiral into open combat. These are not far-fetched scenarios. They are the known flashpoints of modern geopolitics. When both sides are operating under heightened alert, the possibility of an accidental confrontation is not theoretical. It is a daily risk. The United States frames its involvement as the defense of democratic values, but there is also the undeniable reality of domestic politics and economic incentives. Defense contractors from Lockheed Martin to Raytheon are seeing record profits and rising share prices as billions in military aid flow overseas. Political leaders facing economic discontent at home find in foreign policy a way to project strength and rally public opinion. The combination of strategic ambition and political expediency creates a powerful engine for escalation, even when cooler heads might prefer negotiation. Meanwhile, Russia reads every new U.S. commitment of weaponry as evidence that Washington seeks not merely to help Ukraine defend itself, but to weaken Russia itself. Moscow's rhetoric has hardened, warning repeatedly of red lines that, if crossed, would trigger a response. These warnings are not empty. Russia's nuclear doctrine explicitly allows for the use of tactical nuclear weapons if it believes its vital interests are under existential threat. The more Washington increases its military footprint, directly or through proxies, the more it risks crossing thresholds that are invisible until after they have been breached. It is easy, from a distance, to assume that deterrence will hold, that rational leaders will always pull back from the brink. But history counsels humility. Leaders are human. Information is imperfect. Crises have a way of outpacing even the most careful planning. As the United States deepens its military involvement in Ukraine, the possibility of a misstep, a misunderstanding, or a single provocative act spiraling into direct U.S.-Russia confrontation becomes alarmingly real. That is the uncomfortable truth we cannot afford to ignore. Behind the public narrative of defending democracy and protecting European security lies a powerful and often overlooked engine of this conflict: economics. The Ukraine war has become a proving ground not only for military strategy, but for the economic interests of some of the most influential players in the United States. When you peel back the layers of patriotic speeches and humanitarian appeals, you discover an intricate network of profits, contracts, and market opportunities that thrive in times of crisis. Ask yourself, who gains most when tension becomes the new normal and when the machinery of war is kept in constant motion? The answer is as revealing as it is unsettling. Consider the defense industry first. Every time Washington announces another $billion package of weapons to Kiev, the stock prices of major U.S. arms manufacturers spike. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman are not simply suppliers. They are beneficiaries of a surge in global demand for their products. Javelin missiles, HIMARS rocket systems, and air defense technology have become symbols of Ukrainian resistance, but they are also high-value commodities in a marketplace where fear drives purchasing decisions. Nations across Europe, now anxious about their own security, are rushing to replenish arsenals and sign long-term contracts for American-made weaponry. This is not conspiracy. It is capitalism functioning exactly as designed. Crises create demand, and demand feeds profits. Energy markets tell a similar story. With Russian gas supplies cut off or drastically reduced, the United States has stepped in as Europe's new energy lifeline. American liquefied natural gas, or LNG, has suddenly become a strategic necessity for European countries desperate to keep factories running and homes heated. The result? U.S. energy producers are exporting record volumes at premium prices, while European consumers brace for higher utility bills and industries face crippling costs. U.S. energy companies enjoy soaring revenues and expanded influence over the European market. The geopolitical earthquake in Ukraine has shifted energy dependencies in a way that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, and American producers have seized the opportunity with remarkable speed. Here is a hook that should give everyone pause. In the midst of a war that threatens millions, markets are rewarding those who can capitalize on chaos. Defense contractors report quarterly earnings with a confidence they have not enjoyed in decades. Energy CEOs speak to investors of historic opportunities born from geopolitical disruption. These are not the words of reluctant participants. They are the language of a marketplace that sees conflict not as tragedy but as business. The political class in Washington understands these dynamics well. Lawmakers from both parties accept significant campaign contributions from defense and energy lobbies, creating a feedback loop where policy decisions and corporate interests reinforce each other. When Congress approves tens of billions in military aid, when it pushes for continued sanctions that lock Europe into dependence on U.S. energy, those votes are not cast in a vacuum. They are shaped by a political economy in which war spending and energy exports are powerful forces in domestic politics. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens, those whose taxes fund these expenditures and whose daily lives absorb the ripple effects, carry the burden. In Europe, households face heating bills that have doubled or tripled. In the United States, inflationary pressures from disrupted supply chains and volatile energy prices hit working families the hardest. Yet these costs are rarely framed as the hidden price of geopolitical ambition. Instead, they are treated as unfortunate but unavoidable side effects. The truth is far less innocent. While millions struggle, a small circle of corporations and investors quietly enjoy extraordinary windfalls. This is the uncomfortable reality behind the noble rhetoric of freedom and defense. Economic motives do not replace the moral or strategic arguments for supporting Ukraine, but they complicate them in ways the public debate too often ignores. When profits soar as bombs fall, when stock markets cheer what human beings must endure, we are reminded that modern warfare is not only fought on the battlefield. It is also waged in boardrooms and trading floors where every escalation is an opportunity and every crisis a potential payday. That is why the economic dimension of U.S. involvement is not just a side note to the war, it is one of its most driving and dangerous forces. The most chilling danger of the Ukraine conflict is how easily a regional war can slip beyond its intended borders and ignite a confrontation among the world's most powerful militaries. Every new step in U.S. involvement, every additional weapons package, every layer of intelligence support, every covert operation nudges the conflict closer to a threshold that no one can clearly define until it has been crossed. The United States and its NATO allies frame their actions as necessary deterrence, but deterrence is a delicate game. It relies on precise calculations and on both sides correctly reading each other's intentions. History shows how easily such calculations fail and how swiftly events can spiral into an outcome neither side wanted. Ask yourself, how many wars began with the confident belief that they could be contained only to consume far more than their architects ever imagined? World War I offers the classic cautionary tale. In the summer of 1914, leaders in Europe believed that a limited regional conflict could be managed, that alliances would hold and diplomacy would prevail. Instead, a single assassination in Sarajevo set off a chain reaction of mobilizations and ultimatums that plunged the entire continent into catastrophe. The echoes of that history are uncomfortably loud today. One Sabre attack misread as an act of war, one errant missile landing across a NATO border, or one accidental shoot down of an aircraft could serve as the modern Sarajevo moment. A trigger that forces each side to act before it can fully assess the consequences. The presence of nuclear weapons makes the stakes exponentially higher. Unlike the early 20th century, we now live in a world where a single miscalculation could destroy entire cities within minutes. Russia's military doctrine allows for the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons if it perceives an existential threat. The United States maintains a nuclear triad designed for rapid response. The more Washington deepens its involvement, providing advanced long-range weapons or integrating NATO's intelligence with Ukrainian operations, the greater the risk that Moscow interprets these moves as an existential danger, pushing it closer to thresholds that cannot be reversed. When nuclear forces are on alert, the difference between a drill and a real strike can be the result of a misunderstood radar signal or a communication glitch. Hooks for our attention are everywhere. A sudden blackout in a European capital blamed on cyber sabotage, a U.S. reconnaissance drone intercepted too aggressively over the Black Sea, or a Ukrainian strike that Russia claims was coordinated by NATO operatives. Each of these scenarios is entirely plausible and each could demand an immediate response. In such a climate, political leaders are under immense pressure to appear strong rather than cautious. Retaliation becomes a test of credibility. Hesitation is framed as weakness. The very psychology of power makes escalation the easier choice in moments of crisis. The longer the war drags on, the greater the chance that fatigue and frustration will erode diplomatic restraint. Political timelines add fuel to the fire. U.S. elections, European energy shortages, and Russian domestic pressures all create incentives for bold moves that distract from internal challenges. A leader looking to rally support or shift headlines might be tempted to escalate, believing that a decisive strike or a dramatic show of force will turn the tide. Yet such calculations often backfire, unleashing reactions far beyond what anyone intended. It is tempting to trust that modern communication and intelligence will prevent catastrophe, that cooler heads will prevail. But technological sophistication does not eliminate human error. It amplifies its consequences. The machinery of war moves faster than deliberation, and the pressure to respond in minutes leaves little room for reflection. The uncomfortable truth is that the path from proxy conflict to direct confrontation is not a dramatic leap. It is a series of small, seemingly rational steps. Each shipment of advanced weaponry, each new sanction, each retaliatory cyber operation is a step closer to a confrontation that would dwarf the horrors we have already witnessed. The risk of a wider war is not an abstract fear. It is the logical endpoint of a pattern we are already following, and every day that pattern grows harder to break. Throughout history, moments of terrifying brinkmanship have reminded us that the surest path away from catastrophe is dialogue. When global powers find themselves locked in confrontation, diplomacy is not a display of weakness, it is the highest form of strength. Today, as the war in Ukraine continues to grind on and the United States deepens its involvement, the need for serious, sustained negotiation is more urgent than at any time since the end of the Cold War. Yet the political will to pursue such diplomacy often lags behind the momentum of escalation. Ask yourself, how many times have leaders known the danger of conflict yet chosen the easier, more dramatic path of force over the slower, quieter work of peace? The temptation to show strength through weapons rather than words has toppled empires and devastated nations. History offers vivid warnings. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the world stood on the edge of nuclear annihilation. Military planners on both sides urged swift action, convinced that hesitation invited weakness. But it was the secret back-channel communication between President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev, not the show of military might, that prevented disaster. In the 1970s, Détente between the United States and the Soviet Union demonstrated that even bitter rivals can carve out spaces of cooperation when mutual survival is at stake. These precedents are not mere historical footnotes. They are blueprints for the kind of strategic imagination urgently needed today. Yet in the present conflict, diplomacy has been consistently overshadowed by the spectacle of military aid and the drumbeat of sanctions. Washington and Moscow exchange accusations while European capitals debate the size of the next weapons shipment. The longer this pattern continues, the narrower the path for meaningful negotiation becomes. With every passing month, mistrust deepens and political leaders on all sides face domestic pressures to appear unyielding. Diplomacy, once delayed, does not simply wait, it withers, and the cost of reviving it grows exponentially. Hooks for our attention abound. Imagine a sudden winter surge in energy prices across Europe, sparking protests that destabilize governments. Picture an unexpected battlefield breakthrough that tempts one side to reject compromise in favor of total victory. Consider a U.S. election cycle in which candidates compete to appear toughest on Russia, turning foreign policy into a stage for political theater rather than careful statesmanship. Each of these scenarios makes negotiation not only more urgent but more difficult as the emotional temperature of politics rises and reasoned discussion becomes politically dangerous. True diplomacy requires courage of a different kind, the courage to face criticism from allies and domestic constituencies, the patience to sit across the table from an adversary who may have committed grave wrongs. It demands the recognition that negotiation is not capitulation, it is an investment in survival. The hard truth is that wars rarely end on the battlefield alone. They end when both sides, however reluctantly, decide that the price of victory is higher than the cost of compromise. The longer leaders wait to reach that recognition, the more lives are lost and the more entrenched the divisions become. The United States has both the capacity and the historical responsibility to lead such efforts. Its diplomatic machinery, alliances, and global influence give it unique leverage to bring stakeholders together. Yet political calculations at home often favor the spectacle of military resolve over the quiet persistence of diplomacy. Lawmakers find it easier to vote for billions in weapons than to expend political capital on talks that might be labeled appeasement. But strength is not measured by the number of missiles shipped abroad. It is measured by the ability to prevent those missiles from ever being used. Without a reinvigorated commitment to negotiation, the world risks drifting toward a confrontation no one can win. Diplomacy may lack the drama of the battlefield and the headlines of military aid, but it remains the most powerful tool humanity has to prevent the unthinkable. The question is not whether dialogue is possible, it is whether leaders will summon the courage and the foresight to choose it before the opportunity disappears.